In a small pastoral town, the youth pay tribute with their flesh. My college degree is about as useful as a broken foot. But I chose to study journalism. And the consequences are mine to accept. Still, in a time when award-winning reporting amounts to a listicle about 10 foods to avoid if you want to cut belly fat, it's hard to care about your craft. I started caring again when I got a strange, terrifying lead from my former classmate Dave Jensen. A formal write-up will never get published. But I owe you an account of what happened. As far as I know, the seamstress is still out there, still searching for her next pound of flesh. Is my journalism degree any more useful now than it was before I heard about the seamstress? No. But maybe my legacy lies in creating this warning. Maybe by writing this, I can save even one person from the gruesome fate of getting their skin unstitched from their body. Dave, did you hear about the kid who shoved his arm down a garbage disposal? Dave had an eager way about him. An obsession with sensational breaking news, a bad habit of setting a grim stage for the day before you had your morning coffee. It was 7:30 a.m. I'd just rolled out of bed. Me, you really have to stop doing that. Dave. Dave stopped doing what? He was legitimately confused. I knew thanks to the 3 warping dots that indicated he was typing. Deleting his message. Typing again. But it dawned on him. And he sent a response. Dave, right. I always forget. Several years back, Dave had been the one to tell me about the ghost ship fire. It was an artist collective built inside a warehouse, a maze-like makeshift hovel filled with flammable things like window and bed frames, railings, pianos, motorhomes, tapestries, sculptures, and even tree stumps. A spiral stairway was constructed from wood pallets that led up to a loft, into which more fuel was piled. It seemed that anything flammable the residents could find, they brought inside. The deadbeat proprietors of the place hosted an electronic house music concert, inviting dozens of people. No sprinkler system. No exits marked. No safety measures in place. The fire had an unknown cause. 36 people died. The morning it happened, I'd been making a bagel and cream cheese, which was interrupted by Dave calling to break the brutal news. Now, he was back at it again. I took the opportunity to remind him of my boundaries. Me, as a general rule, I don't want to hear about kids putting their arms down garbage disposals before 9:00. Dave, fair. But it's in your neck of the woods. Maybe this will be your big break. He piqued my interest. So I called him. It's the weirdest ducking thing, said Dave. His words buzzed through the line. He swore like a sailor. I mean, ducking, Christ. Shoving your arm down a garbage disposal. The kid was a pitcher on the high school baseball team. Kyler Coleman is his name. The big leagues were scouting him, apparently. And it was his goddamn throwing arm. My stomach lurched. What else have you heard? I asked. Only that it's not the first time. He put his other arm down a garbage disposal too. No, I meant he's not the first kid to maim himself. It's happened to 11 other kids. 2. At least according to what I've found so far. All of them between the ages of 12 and 17. Different body parts. Different methods of violence. I opened my laptop. The people in that town, continued Dave, they're calling it an epidemic. Epidemic was one of those words you knew, even if you didn't have an exact definition. But I typed it in to remind myself. A widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. I don't get it, I said. It's a disease. An infection of the mind, said Dave. That's what someone called it. No one is taking the kids seriously. Just writing it off as them being nuts. Sending them to the nut house for a bit. Then pushing it under the rug. How about the police? I asked. From what I can tell, they did the bare minimum, said Dave. The town is called Redacted. If you want to learn more. I didn't recognize the name, But after typing it into Google, I saw that it was about 45 minutes outside the city. I am going, I said. Convinced already? Huh. Yeah. I am not interested in repackaging Wikipedia articles on Medium anymore. Maybe it will be my big story. Who knows? I should get ready. I stood up and made my way toward the shower. Thanks for the lead, Dave. No problem, he said. Look, Kate. I know you're a lone wolf. But be careful. This whole thing ducking freaky. Man. The kids are chalking it up to, for lack of a better ducking word, an urban legend. An urban legend. They call her the seamstress. Said Dave. They remove their flesh for her in various ways, offering it as tribute. That way, the thinking goes, she won't come for the rest of your family. My stomach lurched again. Too much information. Too damn early in the morning. Just the facts, said Dave, but I thought you should know about some of the anecdotal stuff. This shit is ducking wild. Cold calling, in my experience, is almost always a recipe for disaster. People don't like Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on their door with the latest issue of the Watchtower. They don't like snooping amateur journalists either. If Kyler Coleman's parents had been home, I probably would have been read the riot act and told to get off their porch. But it was just him. I rang the doorbell, and he answered. He was a bit over 6 feet tall, athletic looking. Black buzz cut. Everything was intact aside from his amputated right arm. I knew it was him at once. Hi there. Are you Kyler? Who's asking? He looked skittish. It didn't match up with his broad-chestedness, his confident posture. In another lifetime, he would still be a carefree 17-year-old star athlete. Whatever caused him to stick his arm down a garbage disposal had changed him forever. My name is Kate Hunter, I said. I run an online blog. You're a reporter? A freelancer? Kyler glanced down at his missing arm. I already told the cops what happened, he said. I was hoping to ask you a few more questions. Kyler looked up and down the street. He was worried, almost paralyzed by anxiety. It didn't add up. It was a suburban street lined with cookie-cutter houses, white picket fences, and carefully sculpted front lawns. The birds were chirping. The sun was out. But Kyler's expression made it seem like we were standing in the middle of a war zone. Come in before anyone sees us, he said. He closed the door behind me and led me to the living room. The house was a split level, extensively remodeled. Kyler's parents made a good amount of money. Or at least they spent like they did. The fancy furniture made that blatantly obvious. Do you want water or anything? He asked. Sure. Water would be great. He went to the kitchen. I heard the sound of the ice dispenser and the faucet. I set up my things. Kyler came back and handed me the glass. Then he dropped onto the cloud-like couch, the overstuffed cushions wheezing beneath his large athletic frame. He looked exhausted. It didn't fit a person as young as him. God willing, he had 60 or 70 more years of life to look forward to. I'll talk to you, he said, sitting up. But you have to promise me you won't try to change her mind. Whose mind? I asked. Sarah Felton, he said. She has to offer tribute. It's too late now. Sarah Felton, I asked. Offer tribute? I don't think I follow. Sarah is next on the list, said Kyler. The seamstress needs a pound of flesh from her. It's either 1 pound or... He paused, his eyes focusing on something I couldn't see. Or however much the skin of Sarah's entire family weighs. Kyler turned back to me, grave sincerity in his expression. Don't try to stop her. Sarah is already marked. So it's too late. But maybe if you do a write-up or something, I don't know. Maybe others won't have to suffer. It was a lot to take in. So I decided to do what I did best. I listened. Do you mind if I record this? Kyler. No. He said. You definitely should. I set down my phone and started recording. If you wouldn't mind. Just say once more that I have your consent to record our conversation. You do. He said. I mean. You have my permission. Okay. Why don't you? It all started last summer. Kyler said. Looking out my window. I saw her in the yard. It was a Thursday. The seamstress, there she was. Standing in the moonlight. Smiling that big ducking ugly smile of hers. Who is the seamstress? I asked. A monster. He said. If she marks you, you have to act fast. Within 48 hours. You have to make your tribute and leave it in the spot where you saw her. What does she look like? I asked. Like a nightmare. Replied Kyler. You know Alice in Wonderland? The Cheshire Cat. I did. But I was older than Kyler. I didn't know kids still read Lewis Carroll or looked at his psychedelic drawings. The only reason I heard about the Cheshire Cat, said Kyler, as if reading my mind, is because that's what her smile looks like. The seamstress is pretty normal looking until she opens her mouth. Beautiful. Even. Which is why we trust her at first. She has pale blonde hair. Pale as moonlight. Pale skin to match. Her eyes glow like twin stars. But when she opens her mouth, I waited for Kyler to find his next words to avoid muddying them with my interpretation. Her teeth are needles, said Kyler. Not like needles. Actual needles. Thousands and thousands of them. She sews flesh with her mouth. I took a drink of the water Kyler had given me. The crispness of it brought me back to reality. I looked at what remained of Kyler's arm, wondering more about how he'd lost it. You should have seen my coach, Kyler said, studying the hand and fingers that weren't there. He was sobbing. You were going to the MLB, you had such a bright future. But the adults don't realize it isn't a choice. If the seamstress shows up outside your house at night, you better give her your flesh within 2 days. 48 hours. Like I said, you have to pay tribute. Or she takes your whole ducking family. I don't mean to be insensitive, I said. But how do you know your family will be taken if you don't pay tribute? Because Sam Billingsley, said Kyler. What happened to Sam? He got marked, said Kyler. He was one of the first. But he called bullshit. Thought we were hurting ourselves for no reason. Kyler drew a deep breath. Then he grabbed my water and took a drink, letting it sit in his mouth for a moment before swallowing. I grew up with Sam, he said. I knew his family. And the seamstress skinned them all like it was nothing. And it was for nothing, too. Because Sam blew his head off with his dad's shotgun a few weeks later. The back of my neck began itching suddenly, as though an insect had skittered across it. I clapped my hand to it, nothing there. Kyler was watching me. So I pretended to massage the muscles, then cleared my throat. Can you tell me more about the night you lost your arm? My parents go to bed early, said Kyler. Around 9. My little brother does also. It had almost been 2 days by then. I put it off as long as I could. But I saw the seamstress outside both nights. So I knew I had to be brave, and I saw the stitch marks on my right forearm. The stitch marks? Yeah, said Kyler. Bone white. Like a scar drawn in chalk. 1 line. 3 others crossing through it. It's her sign. The seamstress puts it on whatever body part she wants. Then you have to take care of the rest. That night, he continued, I went downstairs. I thought about what I could use. This kid in my grade, Phil Thomas, used his dad's bandsaw to cut off his foot. This girl, Lindsay Mayfield, she almost ran out of time. Didn't know what to use. So she cut out a big chunk of her stomach with her mom's cooking scissors. It ended up being enough. And the seamstress left her family alone. But Lindsay has to shit into a bag now. I sat in silence, completely stunned. Kyler was desensitized. Lindsay went too deep, he said. Ducked up her guts. Hence, you know, the bag. Tell me more about what happened to you, I said, wanting more than anything to shift the subject away from Lindsay Mayfield. I almost ran out of time. 2. Kyler continued. But right as the sun started coming up, I thought of my mom and my dad and my brother. About wanting them to be safe. And I went through with it. I grabbed a huge bottle of hydrogen peroxide. My mom had always used it to clean scratches and stuff. Then I turned on the disposal and jammed my arm down into it, pouring in hydrogen peroxide with my free hand. I'd never felt anything so painful. But I fought back the urge to stop and kept pressing down until I hit the elbow joint. Right near the end, said Kyler. My mom came downstairs, hearing the sound of screaming and the grinding disposal. She fainted. It was lucky because when my dad came down, he went to her, rather than trying to stop me. I got a trash bag from under the sink where we kept them and reached into the drain, pulling out what was left of my arm. I remember seeing the peroxide bubbling up from it, frothing over, spilling through my fingers, and onto the ground. I got most of it into the bag, stumbled outside, and left it near where the seamstress had been standing. As unsettled as I was also captivated. I'd never heard anything like this. Kyler's description of the seamstress and his conviction that she existed was terrifying. When I woke up, finished Kyler, I was in a hospital. My arm was gone. They cauterized the stump. They said I was lucky I didn't bleed to death. But my family was safe. It was worth it. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway. You should go, Kyler said. My dad's gonna be ducking pissed when he finds out you're interviewing me. I said. I am so sorry for what happened to you, Kyler. He shook his head. Don't be. It sucks before. And it sucks while it's happening. But then the seamstress ducks off and goes to bother someone else. I am thankful. Honestly. Don't feel sorry for me. It's Sarah Felton you should feel sorry for. The front door opened. Kyler's dad was standing there. He looked furious. I wondered how many aspiring journalists like me had come to interview his son. He knew who I was and why I'd come. Even at a glance. Please leave, he said. And I did. Kyler snuck through the side door of his house and ran out to meet me just as I started up my car. Remember, he said, about Sarah, don't try to stop her. Just leave. Do your write-up. Warn people about this and tell the truth. But Sarah has to pay tribute. The seamstress already marked her. How do you know? I asked. We have a Discord, he said. For survivors. And for people who the seamstress has marked. Sarah was marked a day and a half ago. We coached her. Told her she doesn't have a choice. She has to do it tonight. Or her whole family dies. I resolved to find out where she lived. You're not listening to me, said Kyler. If you try and stop her, you're responsible for her whole ducking family dying. He reached through the window. With his good arm with considerable strength he grabbed my collar and wrenched me toward the window. His eyes were wide with terror. Like a rabbit caught in a snare. I put the car in reverse. Kyler started hyperventilating. He held on as long as he could but eventually lost his grip, doing a sad pirouette in the driveway as he spun to the ground. He'd begun sobbing. He looked utterly helpless. And I hated myself for not doing him the courtesy of promising that I'd leave town. But I couldn't. I had to stop Sarah. The kids were too young to continue maiming themselves. As I drove away, I saw that Kyler's dad had come out. He was attempting to hug his son, to pull him to his feet. Kyler pushed him back weakly with his remaining hand. His dad began sobbing as well. I spent the rest of the day hunting down Sarah's address. I searched social media feeds. I found her profile. Saw her in pictures with her friends. But I couldn't find an address. Morning led to afternoon. Afternoon fell toward twilight. I watched the sun creep across the sky toward the western hills on the town's outskirts as time ticked by. Night wasn't far off as far as I knew. Sarah was already preparing to strip the flesh from whatever body part the seamstress had marked. I went to a diner. Ordered a coffee to fight back against my exhaustion. And called. Dave. Dave, the kids, they're hurting themselves and they think the seamstress is after them, the urban legend you mentioned. Slow down. Kate. Shut up and listen. Dave. I need your help, a girl. Her name is Sarah Felton. All I have is my ducking phone and no clue how to find out where she lives. I am at my computer. Dave replied. Hold on a second. I picked up my coffee. My hand shaking. The hot liquid spilling out of the cup and running down my arm. Coffee was the last thing I needed. But I had to stay awake. To stay alert. To save Sarah. Anything? I asked. People around the diner had begun to take notice of me. A man sitting at the bar. A waitress who just brought him a burger and fries. The line cook. Staring out from beneath the rectangular order window and the kitchen on the other side. James and Marcia Felton. Said Dave's daughter. Sarah. 15 years old. Dave was the best investigative reporter I knew, just as unemployable as I was. But exceptionally skilled at finding things. I had no idea how he found Sarah. And I didn't care. Any other Feltons in? Redacted. Not that I can see. Said Dave, take a deep breath. Kate. If the girl's in trouble, it's not going to help if you smash through her living room window. I listened. I tried to breathe normally. To calm my frayed nerves. I pushed the coffee cup away and drank my water instead. Then I looked out the window. The amber magic hour light was gone. Darkness was descending. I raised my hand and snapped at the waitress. She came over. Don't get pushy, miss, she said. Can I get my check? Please. For a $2 coffee. I pulled out a 20 and left it on the table. Then rushed out. Still with me. Kate. I'd forgotten that Dave was on the line. Yeah. I said. Text me the address. I am heading over. Sarah Felton's house was too goddamn far away. 25 minutes. According to Google Maps. Far on the other side of town. I drove faster. Hoping I wouldn't get pulled over. I swerved past cars that were driving too slow and through yellow to red lights. Everything seemed to stand in my way. But I fought against each roadblock. Keeping the girl at the front of my mind. After pulling onto a winding, private road, I saw it, a tall, 3-story Victorian mansion. Remembering what Dave said about not smashing through the living room window, I slowed down and parked near the end of the driveway. I ran along in the darkness. I remembered the seamstress, her mouth made of needles, always watching her next mark. But I couldn't see anyone in the shadows. It was just me and the jackhammer feeling of my heart doing its best to burst through my chest. I got to the front door. I straightened my clothes. Wiped the sweat from my face. Then I rang the doorbell. I looked down at my watch, 7:01 p.m. Night had arrived. I rang the doorbell again. And a minute later, a man answered. He scanned me with his eyes. Can I help you? Hi there, is Sarah home? The man, Sarah's dad, raised an eyebrow. My name is Kate Hunter, I said. I am a journalist. Why do you want to talk to Sarah? I need to warn her, I said. To stop her, she's going to hurt herself. His expression turned serious. I think you'd better go. Without stopping to think, I pushed past him and ran inside. He grabbed my shirt, stopping me, pulling me back toward him. I ripped away. and my shirt sleeve tore off, staying in his hand. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he yelled. "Marcia, call the police." I didn't stop. I kept running. I circled through the kitchen, the TV room, another fancy lounge area, its back wall lined with expensive bottles of booze, but there was no sign of a 15-year-old girl. Sarah's dad chased me through the house, gaining on me, understanding the layout better than I did. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut overhead. I ran back to the entryway, from which a massive staircase led up to the second floor. Sarah's dad clutched at my heels. I heard the sound of her mom frantically yelling into the phone, telling the police about a crazy woman who'd broken into their house. I reached the second floor hallway. Looking left and right, I saw that the doors were all open. I made my way to the third floor. At the end of the hallway, I saw a closed door, a sliver of light shining from beneath it. I ran toward it and grabbed the knob locked. Sarah's dad finally caught up to me, grabbing my arm and yanking me back. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "The door," I said. "It's locked. Listen. Send me to jail after this. I don't care. But if you have any love for your daughter." He tried the knob, it wouldn't budge. He began banging on the wood. "Sarah, open up." I heard the sound of crying on the other side. "It's too late, I'm sorry, she's already here." "Sarah, hold on," I said. "We can help you." The sound of a foot meeting solid wood cut off my words. Sarah's dad had lifted his leg, attempting to kick down the door. Again. And again. Finally, the door smashed off its hinges, revealing Sarah. She was standing near her open window. As I went into the room, she started making her way out onto the roof. I noticed that one end of a rope was attached to her leg. The other end was attached to something outside. I went after her. Sarah had reached the edge of the roof. I saw that the rope was attached to a thick tree branch, 3 feet in diameter. The tree was massive, as old as the property, 50 feet tall at least. I swayed, realizing how high up we were. "Sarah, please, we can get you help. She's here." Sarah sobbed. "I told you. It's too late." She crept closer to the edge of the roof. Sarah, her mom and dad, looking out from her bedroom window, both of them pleading together. "Honey, please. Come back inside, come away from the edge." I saw the look of determination in Sarah's eyes. There was no going back. I went closer, almost reaching her until the sight of something stopped me. I saw a woman standing in the moonlight at the base of the old-growth tree. Her blonde hair and skin were just as silvery and pale as the moon. Her eyes, like Kyler Coleman said, glowed like twin stars. She opened her mouth, a Cheshire cat smile, even at a distance. My vision seemed to zoom in. The seamstress's teeth were needles, thousands of them, like the action of a sewing machine. They rose and fell, rose and fell, looking for something to stitch. "Do you see?" asked Sarah. "I don't have any choice." Wait. But it was too late. Sarah had already stepped off the edge of the roof, plummeting toward the ground 40 feet below. The darkness swallowed her. I heard a snapping noise, a cry of pain, and a grunt. The tree branch creaked under the strain of Sarah's body hitting the end of the rope. I ran past Sarah's parents, down the stairs, and outside. I followed the sound of groaning, letting it lead me through the darkness. Then I saw her. Sarah was lying on the ground, her body twisted unnaturally. The first thing I saw was her collarbone. It was broken. It stuck out through her neck at a diagonal, 45-degree angle. I went to her, bending down. I saw the gleaming ball of her hip joint. Her leg was gone, torn away from her body. But the thing that terrified me most wasn't Sarah's mangled body or her non-existent leg. It was the noose, swaying in the night breeze. A few shreds of flesh hanging from it like witch hair moss. There was no leg to speak of. "Do you?" Sarah groaned. "Do you see?" I followed Sarah's eyes. Backing away into the darkness was the seamstress. She seemed to be chewing on Sarah's severed leg, her needle teeth running up and down it, exploring the flesh, tasting it, savoring it, unstitching it from the bone beneath. The next several hours passed in a blur. The paramedics came. They saved Sarah's life. I overheard them talking about how she broke her back, that she couldn't move her remaining leg. Her parents clutched each other, wrapped in blankets provided by the EMTs. The cops cuffed me, put me in a cruiser, and drove to the station. But my stay was short. The next morning, Dave picked me up, having driven the whole night after I called him. In the time since then, I've followed Sarah's case. News cycles came and went. Sarah's accident had paralyzed her from the waist down. Not long after being admitted to a psych ward, she was released and went home to live with her parents. They could have pressed charges. There was speculation that some insane amateur journalist had pushed Sarah from the third floor of her home. But surprisingly, Sarah's parents came to my defense, saying that I'd only tried to help her. I think about what happened to Sarah every night when the moon comes up. I think about the kids in that small pastoral town, wondering if the seamstress has finally satisfied her hunger. Sarah was the last victim. But looking out my window at night, I see that Cheshire Cat smile. In the moonlight, I see a mouthful of needles, rising and falling, rising and falling, starving for a fabric of human flesh. I like what you're doing here. I wonder who would win in the dark convoy versus the seamstress. Oh hell yeah. Dude, it's like that old MTV thing, Celebrity Deathmatch. I just want to create villains and throw M in a ring. Or maybe her versus the Butterfly Man.